for the second before the last time. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Madison. I'm Teresa Holmes, Club President. Thank you all for being with us today. Today's meeting is being sponsored by our own club's Rockefeller's Investment Fellowship Group. Our thanks to them for their sponsorship of today's meeting. We will start today's meeting by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance together. Then our guests will be introduced by Terry Morawski. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I think you can sit down. Yeah.
Oh, no music today, you're right.
No music, okay. Thank you, President Teresa. So when I was asked to volunteer for this, I thought there might be one or two guests. We've got a list of guests today, so more chances to mispronounce something. I hope I don't. So guests, if you please stand when I call your name and remain standing. Jim Fauerbach, guest of Neil Fauerbach. Jackie Hank, guest of Tim Muldooney. Christine Colby, guest of Carol Colby. Lisa Monroe, guest of Barb Wiley. Katie Smith, guest of Ron Luskin. Carol Stellar, guest of Joan Collins. Marian Reichman, guest of Paul Reichman. Janine Yasser Moe, guest of the Program Committee. David O'Connor, guest of Christine Goforth. Tracy Tompkins, guest of Karen Kendrick Hans. Curtis Mathis, you thought I was kidding, didn't you? Guest of Susan Smith. Lauren Simonis Hunter, guest of the Program Committee. Joanne Berg, guest of the Program Committee. And our youngest guest of the day, AJ Gray, guest of Anthony Gray. Round of applause for our guests.
Our new members are faring well. Thank you, Terry. All right, in my Did You Know segment today, I actually have two items. I wanted to talk briefly about the topic of women in Rotary. Did you know that July will mark the 35th anniversary of women joining our Rotary Club of Madison? In honor of that, our Rotary Information Committee is going to have a series of reports at each of our July meetings to mark this momentous occasion as we celebrate our women Rotarians. And our program coming up today includes one of our former female members, Kit Saunders-Nordeen, who joined our club in 1988, just over a year after women were allowed to join. She was the 32nd woman to join our club. My other Did You Know item is, did you know what next week's program is all about? Yeah. You don't want to miss it. That's right, fans. Next week is our Changing of the Guard program, and we're going to have a great time. Join us, please. All right, our club has a member caring subcommittee that reaches out to our members in times of need to send well wishes to members who are celebrating some of life's happy moments. Loretta Himmelsbach is a member of that committee, and she is going to come up and give us a brief report.
I'm going to take you back 20 years, 2002. I'd been a Rotarian for several years. My parents had just moved to Madison to be closer to their only daughter, me. Dad died 8 months later. The cards, phone calls, and your presence was significant at that time of loss. Your encouragement, as I cared and advocated for my mother for the next 18 years until she died, helped to keep me going in Rotary. Rotarians care, and the Caring Committee, formed in 2017, and the brainchild of Donna Moreland, is here to offer support during your challenging times and to celebrate your happy moments. Please share your news, whether it's a health concern, a loss, or a celebration. We can reach out and remind one another that we're Rotarians who care. Also, please consider joining the committee in sending a card or making a phone call. After all, you matter to this world and to this club. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. I too have benefited from the Caring Committee's kindness through cards, phone calls, visits, as not just a year ago, when I was transitioning into the role of president, I was nurturing my mom who was dealing with pancreatic cancer and later passed away. So, Rotary Friendship Exchange announcement. Gary chairs our international committee, and he has an announcement.
Well, thank you. It's good to see everybody here today. This announcement isn't what I thought it was going to be, but so anyway, so let's go over the basics. Our district is going to be engaging in a friendship exchange. What does this have to do with Rotary International projects? Our Chile project that we supported was really the result of a friendship exchange that our district did several years ago. This exchange will take place this October, September 22nd through October 2nd or so. It's going to primarily northern Poland, and there will be capacity for 12 Rotarians. Edwin Boss from the Fort Atkinson Club will be the leader of this, so if you have an interest, you should get your name in. I'm sure you can find some information on our website. Costs are pretty reasonable. Flight ticket round trip right now is $500 to Poland. There will be some other expenses that will be part of this, but it's a very reasonable way to travel. The one caveat is that you're expected to reciprocate later on when the folks from Poland and their district come and visit us. This is a great way to make an international connection. It's a great way to make some new friends. I highly encourage you to take advantage of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. I think we may see Gary a little later in the next Rotary year when we talk about a potential Ugandan fellow friendship exchange. All right. Birthdays. We have birthdays to celebrate today with a bit of humor or wisdom that complements our Rotary mission. We also encourage members to make an age-appropriate gift to the Madison Rotary Foundation, rounded up to $100 for our club's Synergy Scholarship Fund. Rotarians, when I call your name, if you are in the room, please stand. June 19th, Ralph Cagle. June 21st, Larry Hands, who says, "So glad to see all Rotary is doing to protect our environment. What can you do to help fight climate change?" And June 21st, Karen Kendrick Hands, the wife, who says, "Kudos to our Rotary Club for incubating the Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group, ESRAG, and the 7th area of focus for protecting the environment. Imagine all the good we could do if our club formed an environment committee, developed environmental projects, and if a critical mass of our members joined ESRAG." Thank you both. June 22nd, Neil Farbach, who also shares a quote from his brother, Jim, who is in the room, his favorite philosopher, Dr. Seuss. "Unless someone like you cares a awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not." June 22nd, Margaret Murphy. June 22nd, John Udell, June 22nd. Bob Winding, June 25th. Martha Bukelik Austin. Thanks to our celebrants for their contributions to the Madison Rotary Foundation, and Casey Okers will lead us in the singing of Happy Birthday to this week's celebrants. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rotarians. Happy birthday to you. I have an announcement. We send our sympathies to Rotarian Ben Blagoji's mother and his family, his mother Alice Blagoji passed away on June 16th in Lagos, Nigeria. We extend our condolences to Ben and to his family. Also, congratulations to Stu Leviton, who was recently inducted into the Arts and Letters Hall of Fame of the Frederick Gunn School. All right, now on to the program. Today's program, Doug Moe is returning to us to speak about his newest book about Kit Saunders-Nordeen, who I mentioned earlier in our meeting. Doug has been a journalist in Wisconsin for more than 4 decades. He wrote a daily newspaper column in Madison for 18 years, and prior to that was editor of the Madison Magazine. He is the author of more than a dozen books, including most recently, Tommy, My Journey of a Lifetime, which was a collaboration with Tommy G. Thompson on the former governor's autobiography. He is currently working on a collaboration with Mike LeCrone on the longtime UW band leader's autobiography. Cool. Today, Doug is going to talk to us about his newest book titled The Right Thing to Do, Kit Saunders-Nordeen and the Rise of Women's Intercollegiate Athletics at the University of Wisconsin and Beyond. And Mystery to Me Bookstore will be selling copies of his book today after our meeting. The cost is $19.99, and if you're interested, members can stop by the table in the hallway after the meeting adjourns and purchase a copy. Doug apparently will also sign it if you like. We look forward to your presentation, Doug, and we have made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking to us today. I also like to mention that we will have Q&A with our speaker as time allows, and please wait for the microphone to come to you if you have a question. Rotarians and guests, let's welcome Doug to our podium.
Thanks very much. Tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of Title IX being signed into law by President Richard Nixon. Those 37 words, part of the Education Amendments Act of 1972, forbid discrimination on the basis of sex for any activity receiving federal financial assistance. Title IX was and remains of huge importance to women's intercollegiate athletics. But it should not be regarded or remembered as a panacea. It faced resistance and legal challenges. It took time to be implemented. There's a famous episode of UW women's athletics history in which the women's crew team changed from their street clothes into their crew uniforms in the entrance to the Elroy Hirsch's office. He was the men's athletic director at the time. They didn't have a locker room. The men did, they didn't. But that was 1979, 7 years after Title IX. Back in 1972, when Kit Saunders first heard about Title IX, she recalled saying, "Oh boy, somebody finally did something. This is probably going to help us." Kit was then, in 1972, running the women's club sports program at UW. There were no varsity sports for women. Kit had arrived in Madison in 1964 for grad school from her native Teaneck, New Jersey. I should note that when Kit's husband, Buzz Nordeen, approached me about doing this book, Kit was severely ill with Alzheimer's, and she was unable to be interviewed. However, she had given 2 extended interviews to the UW Oral History program, which were invaluable to me, as you can imagine. Both Kit and Buzz died in the few years when I was researching and writing this book. The Nordeen family remained steadfast in their support, and which allowed me to finish it. Kit was an excellent athlete even as a young girl in Teaneck. I interviewed a guy named Art Brown, her 6th grade classmate, class of 52, who said, I chose her first if given the chance, even before any of the boys, for the playground games we played. But like any other girl growing up in the 40s and 50s, you know, there were very little sports for Kit or any of the girls. Sports for girls consisted of what they called play day, organized sports, of what were called play days. Kit described them like this. You could get together with another school, but we had names like Donald Duck, Snoopy, or whatever. People were all mixed up, so you couldn't get in a real competitive spirit against another school. Ironically, given that Kit ended up in Madison, the person most responsible for keeping girls and young women from serious athletic competition was a woman named Blanche Trilling, who from 1912 to 1946 was director of women's physical education at UW-Madison and a national leader in women's phy ed. It wasn't anything venal, I don't think, on her part. It was what she believed. Trilling's motto was, a sport for every girl and a girl in every sport. She valued participation, but she was against competition for girls and women, saying, I positively do not approve of competition for women and the undue emphasis that is placed on individual accomplishments and the winning of championships. Trilling was gone, but that mindset remained when Kit got to Madison in 1964 to study for a master's. She eventually ended up earning a PhD. I interviewed a woman named Nancy Page, who was a contemporary of Kit's in Madison in the 60s, and later a Hall of Fame women's coach at UW-Stevens Point. Page said that they once organized a basketball game on campus in Lathrop Hall. The women didn't have a regulation gym, but they had a kind of a gym in Lathrop Hall, and they organized a game against Northern Illinois University. When the head of women's phy ed found out about it, Page said, we were called into her office and read the riot act. I think she wanted to throw us out of school for playing a basketball game. Things did slowly start to change, operative word there being slowly. Kit was named director of the club sports program for women in 1971. Her budget was $2,000 for 11 sports. Kit described it, we had no priority on facilities, we had very limited uniforms. We had 11 teams, and on a weekend we'd have to try to launder the uniforms quickly and get them to the next team. When Title IX became law in 1972, UW Chancellor Ed Young appointed a committee to see how athletics on campus could be made more equitable. Unfortunately, Young chose men's athletic director Elroy Hirsch as chairman of the committee. Now, I was a friend of Elroy's years and years ago, and again, they were in a tough spot because Title IX comes in, and it's you know, ordered that there's going to be equity, but there was no funding. Nobody gave them more money. Of course, the women said, well, we'll share equally then in the unfortunate situation, but Elroy wasn't going to call those meetings. He eventually was replaced by a Professor Murray Fowler, and the committee started meeting on a regular basis. And the result was that in 1974, women's athletics gained varsity status at UW. Kit Saunders was named the first director of women's athletics on July 1, 1974. Kit later recalled that after that press conference naming her athletic director, the sports editor of the Wisconsin State Journal said he had a word of advice for her. What's that, Kit said. Don't be a bitch. Soon after, when Tam Flareup was hired as Kit's first women's sports information director, that same sports editor had a word of advice for her too. I will never have women's sports on my sports pages. Of course, that didn't hold. That sports editor left, and Bill Brophy came in, and the tide was turning. The arrival of Tam Flareup, and around the same time Paula Bonner, as Kit's top assistant, set the team that would propel UW women's athletics forward in the early years. There was success in competition, national championships in crew and cross country. Volleyball was ascendant through the 80s, led by a charismatic coach named Steve Lowe. The Badgers hosted a first-round NCAA volleyball match at the Fieldhouse in 1990. Kit and Tam Flare-Up sat in the top balcony of the old Fieldhouse and watched as nearly 11,000 fans packed the arena. Kit and Tam had tears in their eyes. You know, one of the pleasures for me in doing this book was getting a chance to interview about 24 former athletes and coaches. Almost without exception, they were excited to recall those days. You know, they talked about hardships, traveling in vans and cars and practicing at odd hours, but it was what they knew, and they wanted to compete. One whose story was particularly interesting was a Madison girl named Karen Lunda. She played soccer and softball at Madison West, but when she came to UW, there was no women's soccer varsity program. Instead, Lunda played varsity field hockey when she started a club sport for soccer on campus. Once for a soccer club sport tournament in Indianapolis, Lunda's UW team wanted to play but had no way to get there. Someone had a van, but it was missing its front seat. Karen told me, so we literally duct taped a lawn chair in the front of the van and we all piled in. You know, she paused a moment and said, we just wanted to play. In Lunda's senior year, 1981, UW dropped field hockey as a varsity sport and introduced soccer. While she felt bad for her field hockey teammates, Karen was elated to be able to play varsity soccer, and she made the most of it. She led the Badgers in goals, points, and assists. That one year, the first for women's soccer at UW, got Lunda in the UW Athletic Hall of Fame. In the summer of 2019, 38 years later, Lunda told me she was watching the Women's World Cup final between the U.S. and the Netherlands with a friend. Lunda told me she had not been following the tournament closely, so when an American named Rose Lavelle scored a goal to seal the 2-0 win for the Americans, her friend did a Google search on Lavelle. And that's how Lunda learned the World Cup star was a UW Badger playing the same sport Lunda and her teammates instituted in Madison 4 decades earlier. Other athletes I interviewed included Carrie Graves, a rower from Spring Green who became an Olympic star and a rowing legend. Carrie died late last year. She and Kit were the first 2 inductees into the UW Women's Athletic Hall of Fame in 1984. Carrie is featured and pictured on the cover of a terrific book about the U.S. Women's Olympic rowing team. It's called The Red Rose Crew. I urge you very much to read it right after you read mine. Carrie and her teammates gave Kit her first national championship in 1975 at Princeton, New Jersey, the National Women's Rowing Association Championship. It's one of my favorite parts in the book. Those women didn't believe in themselves until they did. Their coach, Jay Mimier, told them he'd have a case of beer for them if they won, and he did. Pabst Blue Ribbon at the finish line. It was 4 years after that when the women's crew changed clothes outside Elroy's office. Everyone laughs about it, and rightly so in hindsight. But I interviewed the captain of the 1979 team, Jane Ludwig, who said the reaction among the male sports establishment was not amusement. It was traumatizing for me in a way, Jane said. I had alumni calling me, coaches telling me to stop. My male friends on the team really weren't my friends anymore, 7 years after Title IX. I mentioned earlier that Title IX itself was attacked after it became law. The most significant setback involved a Pennsylvania school called Grove City College. Essentially, the claim was that though some of their students received federal financial aid, their athletic department did not, and so should not have to follow sex equity regulations. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed with that argument in a 6-3 decision in 1984. There was a happy ending. Congress passed a new law a couple of years later saying Title IX applied to both direct and indirect beneficiaries of federal aid. Ronald Reagan vetoed it, but Congress overrode the veto. On the Madison campus, only a handful of Title IX complaints were ever filed. One of them was by Edwina Qualls, who was the women's basketball coach in the late 70s and early 80s. Her complaint regarded facilities and travel and practice time and how inequitable they were. Qualls was the one person I really wanted to interview for my book who I was not able to find. Just couldn't find her. She had some success as a coach, but her tenure ended amid great controversy. In February 1984, Qualls' Badgers were playing at Minnesota. In the second half, Qualls became highly upset with the officiating and told her team to leave the court and return to the locker room. 5 players refused and finished the game. The ensuing controversy was the beginning of the end of Qualls' time in Madison. You'll remember I noted that in that 1990 volleyball tournament game in Madison, it was an NCAA tournament game. In the early years after Title IX passed, the NCAA, like much of the male sports establishment, wanted nothing to do with women's athletics and predicted doom for the men's programs if they had to share funding. Consequently, the women established their own organization, the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, AIAW. Kit had risen by 1980 to the position of National Vice President of the AIAW. That was also about the time the women's basketball tournament got a television contract. There was money. Suddenly, the NCAA was interested in women's sports. By 1982, the AIAW was history, usurped by the NCAA. I interviewed a woman named Judy Sweet about this. Judy is a Milwaukee native and attended UW-Madison in the late 1960s, where she was mentored by Kit. She had an interest in athletic administration. Judy, in 1968, became president of a national association of college women's athletes. Judy Sweet went on to be director of both men's and women's athletics at University of California, San Diego in the 70s. And in 1991, Judy Sweet became the first female president of the NCAA. But she was clear-eyed about the NCAA takeover of the AIAW a decade earlier. It was really an insult, Judy told me, to the AIAW that the NCAA went about it the way they did. It really wasn't a merger, it was a submerger. One thing I asked Judy about what she recalled about her first year when she became president in 1991, and she said, one thing she said was, "I'm glad there was no social media." And I kind of paused, and she said, "You wouldn't believe how many people took the time to type or handwrite postal letters telling me I was taking a man's job, and how dare me, and all this." Can you imagine what social media would have been like? Kit ended her career at UW as Associate Athletic Director for all non-income sports. She retired in 1990, just age 49. Her legendary track and cross-country coach, Peter Tagan, told me, "I think she was exhausted. She fought a battle." She'd also married Buzz by then. They traveled extensively, spent time at a farm they owned south of Madison, and of course attended many UW sporting events. In retirement, Kit was recipient of numerous Lifetime Achievement Awards, befitting her status as a true pioneer of women's intercollegiate athletics. It was indicative of how far women's athletics had come in Kit's lifetime. But it would be unwise to become complacent. This past winter, I had a chance to interview Anna Hoffman, a 21-year-old from Madison who was representing the United States in ski jumping at the Winter Olympics. I told her about Kit and my book, and how a contemporary of Kit's, Becky Sisley, a UW-Madison grad in the 60s, and then later the first director of women's athletics at the University of Oregon, told me that women for a long time in the 30s and 40s and in the 50s were prevented from running distance races. It was thought, Becky said, if they ran and jumped, maybe their uteruses would fall out. Anna Hoffman laughed and told me there's controversy today in ski jumping over how high a jump women should ski from. She's gone off the highest of them many times. And here I am, Anna said, fully intact. At the 2021 NCAA men's and women's basketball tournaments, the NCAA wound up having to apologize after photos on social media showed a woeful disparity between the workout facilities that were available for men's teams and women's teams. You can guess who had the superior facilities, 49 years after Title IX, which does not diminish the importance of those 37 words. If it hadn't been for Title IX, Kit once said, we might still be sharing uniforms and scratching the ice off the windows of old fleet cars with our fingernails to travel. In her foreword to my book, Judy Sweet wrote, on the 50th anniversary of Title IX, we can celebrate the positive changes that have been made, but we know there is more to be done. We must remain vigilant and ensure that our daughters have the same opportunities as our sons. That is one of Kit's legacies that must be honored. Thanks for inviting me today, folks. And I will take questions if anybody Stuart. Oh, all right, sorry.
Thanks very much for coming, Doug, and thanks for this important new book, which continues your excellent series of biographies of Madisonians who count. It's an invaluable resource, and the community is indebted to the work you've done for decades and decades, so thank you for that.
Do I owe you money?
No, but you are coming on my radio show on Monday,
Right.
so we'll talk about it later. Given the exceptional work of the UW Oral Histories, was there anything left unasked that you would have liked to have asked Kit if you had had the chance?
Well, that's a great question. You know, I guess I might have asked her if she ever felt, she was so good at working inside that men's athletic umbrella. You know, I think Paula and Bonner, they were great friends, but there was some that felt they weren't moving fast enough, and yet Kit had the way about her to kind of get along on the surface, but have kind of an ironclad resolve underneath. And I often wondered, I guess, doing the research, is whether it ever got so frustrating that she almost, walked out. She never indicated that she had that thought. I found a letter to a friend back home where she expressed a little frustration, but I might have asked her that, I guess.
Would you care to speculate on who you think are three of the most well-accomplished female athletes to be at UW?
Well, Carrie Graves, who I mentioned for sure. Cindy Bremser, a distance runner who was an Olympian and who I interviewed for the book. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Susie Faber Hamilton. I interviewed Susie. Susie's in the book. She didn't respond to my emails to her website, but then a mutual friend was a go-between, and Susie agreed to and she gave me a very good interview of a half hour or so with a mixed bag of memories about UW. Some good, some not good. Another reason to read the book. But, she was outstanding. It's just mind-boggling to look at the national championships and all that she won.
Who was the sports editor, Miller or Butler?
It was Glenn Miller. And in fairness, a little bit of fairness to him, he came around. He wrote a couple of nice columns about Kit after it became inevitable that he was going to have it on its pages. It was, as I said about Elroy, this was tough for these guys to get their heads around. And I remember Kit saying at one point when she started to explain what Title IX really meant, because it doesn't mention athletics anywhere in Title IX. And as a matter of fact, when it passed, nobody paid that much attention. They didn't really realize it took some time, But Kit said when I started telling them what this really means, where athletics is concerned on campus, they were saying, this can't be true, So.
Thanks, Doug, for bringing this important topic today. I have a daughter who's a just retiring from a national level sport in gymnastics. So my question is, how do we change the culture around the support of women's sports so that folks that are in gymnastics and other sports get the recognition they deserve?
Well, that's the question, and it's what Judy Sweet, I think, was getting at, because there's no question great strides have been made. But boy, if just last year there can be this terrible disparity in the practice facilities, I think just staying vigilant. I do think the media is doing a lot better job. You know, ESPN has a series now on Title IX, and they're airing like 30 short documentaries over the course of the next few months, I believe. Gosh, you know, I mean, look how the fan support now, and that translates then into television contracts, and I just hope that the ascendance will continue. I don't know if there's any way to assure it, but let's hope.
Thanks, Doug. I got a preview of your remarks here reading the article in the latest On Wisconsin. You have a nice summary of the book in there. My question is, do you know whether the federal government has ever enforced Title IX against a university athletic department?
Great question, and when I was, it took like 3 years. It was the Health Education Welfare Department, Joseph Califano, who had the original responsibility to enforce, and they gave colleges and universities 3 years to sort of. I suspect yes, Jeff, but I don't know for sure. I mean, I think what they do is they come in and say you've got to improve in this area, that area, this area. Never any kind of hard 50-50 numbers, but just show goodwill, that sort of thing. And I suspect most, and again, I'm sorry I don't have a better answer. I suspect most universities, once they got that warning, probably, the complaint itself probably woke them up, and yeah.
Hi, Doug.
Hey, Martha.
Nice to see you. And I want to echo Stuart's. Thank you for all the books you've written. I'm going to go off topic here and ask you, what is your favorite book that you've written? And just, I mean, you've written so many, and to hear about your new one, it's like, oh, great. Something else to draw us all in. So what's your favorite book? And nice shout out to Karen Lunda. Her sisters were great athletes as well. And
yes. Yes.
And, we all benefited from her work in Title IX, so thanks.
Well, Martha, the cliche, of course, is that when you ask a writer about his books, he says it's like asking somebody about their kids, which one is the favorite. And it could be the fact that it's new, but this one means an awful lot to me. I got to be a very good friend with Buzz Nordeen in the early stages of doing this book and showing him the early chapters. You know, he never did get to see the finished book, but I think he knew it was going in a direction he was happy with. And as several people have said already, it is an important story. So glad to get that one between covers.
Oh, I have a question regarding history. How did Title IX affect international programs like in other countries? Was the United States the leader in this, or were there other countries which had similar Title IX legislation?
Great question, and I simply don't know the answer to that. You know, I was pretty focused on Wisconsin and the United States. I just don't know. Women's athletics worldwide seems to be going okay. You know, I don't know whether it was legislation that did it. Perhaps.
Thanks. Oh, you just hold it? Okay, good. So, thank you. So I look forward to reading your book. Curious, if you look back at history of UW and the decision made to terminate the baseball program back in 1991, Title IX is often cited as one of the reasons. I'm curious if you address that in the book, or if you have any inside knowledge on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's Kit retired in 1990, and the new athletic director, Pat Richter, announced those sports a year later, but it is addressed in the book. And I don't think there's any question that, you know, the necessity of making participation in sports between men and women more equitable at UW-Madison was part of the reason that baseball was, you know, 4 other sports were closed down as well. I think 2 men and 2 women's. And then they instituted women's softball and eventually women's hockey, which has done pretty well. But yeah, I mean, that was, you know, that was tough. It was tough. But going way back to when Murray Fowler came on that committee, and these women said, you know, if funds are scarce, we'll share with you in the scarcity. You know, but you're not going to get them all anymore. You know, so yeah, no question. I think it had an impact on baseball.
Hello, Doug. Nice to have you here.
Hi.
I know that you worked closely with Buzz Nordeen in writing this book, and he was so helpful. Can you speak a little bit to the tremendous support system that he was to Kit during her many years of illness? I know that she couldn't fully participate herself, so how instrumental was he to the book and also to the support of Kit, because it was a difficult and long illness.
He and a couple of friends had gathered a lot of Kit's memorabilia that was going to be and will now be donated to the UW archive. You know, high school yearbooks, that sort of thing, letters. That was made available to me, so it was a great benefit. Of course, Buzz gave me an interview. I think more important in a sense, Buzz became an advocate for Alzheimer's research. The whole Nordeen family did. Horribly, Buzz's first wife had Alzheimer's and was diagnosed in her 50s and died. And then so for Kit to be diagnosed around 2012, 2013 was just cruel. But Buzz was Buzz, you know. He went, the family explained, neighbors, that he went to visit Kit at Oakwood every day, even when she no longer recognized him. So the book doesn't get done, you know, without Buzz and his family, so instrumental. Thanks, folks. Yeah.
All right, that being said, Rotarians, we are adjourned.